Have you ever noticed that the biggest secrets never scream from the front page? Oh no, darling, they hide quietly, sneakily in the tiniest little cracks, waiting for someone bold enough to peek inside. And that's exactly where this scandal begins. Not with Meghan Markle dazzling the world in that white gown. Not even with her breathtaking walk down the aisle of St. George's Chapel. Cameras flashing from every angle. The real story started with something far less glamorous, something millions of people saw but very few understood. Do you remember? Her mother, Doria Ragland, sitting completely alone at that royal wedding. Yes, picture it. On a day broadcast to the entire planet, with global royalty, celebrities, and power players squeezed into pews like sardines, there was Doria. Just one woman in mint green, sitting in isolation opposite the Queen of England herself. No cousins, no uncles, no aunts, no family buzzing with excitement around her. Just Doria, alone. Strange, wasn't it? It didn't just look odd, it felt odd. And if you know anything about the royal machine, you know they never, ever leave optics to chance. Every flower arrangement, every bow, every guest list, calculated. So why, in Meghan's so-called fairy tale wedding, was her only parent left sitting like a solitary figure at one of the most scrutinized events in modern history? Here's the thing. Meghan talked endlessly about family. She sold the story of close bonds, of warmth, of unity, and yet, not a single blood relative from her mother's side filled those pews. Not one. That, my loves, wasn't a coincidence. It was a flashing red warning sign, a giant clue that there was something dangerous, yes, dangerous, about letting too many of Meghan's American relatives within whispering distance of the royal spotlight. And when you tug at that loose thread, the whole family tapestry starts to unravel. What you find isn't just a gap, it's a deliberate blank space in Meghan's family tree, a space the palace worked overtime to keep invisible. The chilling mystery of the blank space. Let's rewind. The moment Harry and Meghan announced their engagement, the British press did what they always do, whipped out those glossy genealogy charts. The royals adore family trees. It's their currency, their brand, their very identity. Every name meticulously printed, every ancestor celebrated, every branch polished for public view. But Meghan's chart? Oh, that one had issues. For her mother, Doria Ragland, there was a glaring hole. The spot where her own mother's name should have been was, wait for it, blank. Just an empty space staring back at the world. At first, people brushed it off. Maybe it was a clerical slip. Maybe Doria was adopted. Maybe her mother's details were unknown. Innocent mistakes, right? Wrong. Because the same blank appeared again and again across different records, across different versions, a pattern too deliberate, too consistent to be an accident. That's when the whispers turned into suspicions. This wasn't laziness. This wasn't an oversight. This was intentional silence. A missing name carefully erased over and over, as if its very existence was too dangerous to acknowledge. But why? Why would the palace or Meghan herself go to such lengths to scrub out the name of a grandmother? Unless revealing that name could unravel the very story they wanted to sell to the world. This wasn't just an omission, it was a warning, a blinking neon sign that screamed, "There's something here you're not supposed to see." The secret slips out, and oh, it finally did. 8 long months after the wedding, after all the carefully staged smiles and curated magazine spreads, the truth leaked. That missing name? It was finally uncovered. Janet Arnold, born September 4th, 1929 in Sandusky, Ohio, died December 27, 2000 at the age of 71. At last, the phantom grandmother had a face, a history, a life traceable through stark black and white records. Birth certificates, death certificates, cemetery listings, church registries. And once Janet's name cracked open the family vault, the floodgates burst wide. Suddenly, the Markle-Ragland tree wasn't a neat little chart anymore. It was a sprawling puzzle teeming with names, dates, and connections long buried. But here's the kicker. Filling in those blanks didn't just solve a mystery, it exposed why those blanks existed in the first place. And that revelation? It wasn't just unusual, it was explosive. Now, you'd think finally finding Janet Arnold would close the case. Mystery solved, grandmother revealed, let's move on. Oh, if only it were that simple. Because once researchers started digging into Janet's background, the family tree began to twist, and not in the charming, aristocratic, we married our cousins way the royals are so infamous for. This was darker, much darker. Let's lay it out. Janet's father, James T. Arnold, born 1909, died tragically young in 1939 at just 30. Her mother? Natalie May Allen Pritchard, born 1897 in South Carolina, lived until 1980, buried in Los Angeles at 83. On paper, that looked perfectly ordinary. A young man, a young woman, starting a family in the 1920s. Nothing shocking there. But when genealogists mapped it all out, one detail leapt from the page like a ghost refusing to stay buried. Both James T. Arnold's mother and Natalie May's mother had the exact same name, Gertrude Elizabeth Sadler. Yes, you heard that right. Both sides of the family tree pointed back to the same woman, which means James and Natalie. They weren't strangers. They weren't distant cousins or in-laws or some quirky, roundabout relation. They were half-siblings. Let that sink in. Meghan Markle's grandmother, Janet Arnold, was the child of a man and a woman who shared the same mother, brother and sister. This isn't tabloid exaggeration. This isn't wild speculation. This is what the records, the cold, black and white government documents point to. Birth certificates, census reports, cemetery listings, all telling the same haunting story. And that, my darlings, is why Janet's name was scrubbed, why the blank existed, because once you place James and Natalie side by side, you can't escape the conclusion. Janet Arnold was allegedly the product of incest. Allegations the palace couldn't stomach now, let's be clear. Every retelling of this bombshell story uses the word alleged, and that's crucial. But what makes it so damning is that these allegations aren't floating on gossip alone. They're rooted in documented proof, records that exist, traceable and undeniable. And here's the rub. We're not talking about some distant cousin marriage, the sort that was practically tradition for European royals desperate to keep bloodlines pure. This was closer, far too close. Half-brother and half-sister, a relationship illegal in the US, even in the 1920s, even in eras when society turned a blind eye to cousins marrying. So, when the palace's background investigators pieced this together, imagine the horror. Meghan wasn't just a divorced American actress with a complicated family, already enough to make Windsor courtiers sweat. She descended from a bloodline tainted by whispers of incest. For the royals, it wasn't simply embarrassing, it was dangerous. The wedding optics, a calculated silence. Now everything about that lonely image of Doria Ragland at the wedding makes sense, doesn't it? Those empty pews weren't an accident. They were a deliberate strategy. A protective wall of silence built around a secret that could have blown the fairy tale narrative to smithereens. Better to have Meghan's mother sit alone than risk some distant cousin or a long-lost relative getting tipsy at the reception and whispering the word incest to a hungry journalist. And remember, in the House of Windsor, optics are everything. What the world sees defines what the world believes. One mother sitting by herself? Strange, yes, but safer. Safer than questions about why entire branches of Meghan's American family were blacklisted. The real scandal. But here's the part that flips the whole story on its head. The scandal isn't only the incest allegation. The real scandal is the cover-up, because history shows us something vital. Powerful families don't implode because of ancient sins. They implode because of lies, because of silence, because of the desperate attempts to hide what's already festering. When the royal family updated Meghan's genealogy, every ancestor's name was neatly printed, except Janet Arnold's parents. That omission wasn't a mistake. It was proof. Proof that the palace thought burying the truth was safer than confronting it. And darling, in history, that kind of choice always backfires. For Meghan and Harry, this revelation wasn't just a footnote in a dusty archive. It was a ghost trailing them everywhere they went. Think about it. Every glamorous red carpet walk in Hollywood, every carefully staged Netflix interview, every charity event Meghan attends with her mother. Behind the smiles and polished sound bites, there's a shadow that never quite leaves the room. The palace already knows. They knew before the vows. They knew before Meghan ever became Her Royal Highness. They knew that the woman who married into the most scrutinized family on earth carried a bloodline story so scandalous, so unpalatable that silence felt safer than truth. And Meghan, she's been forced to live with that silence, to carry the weight of a family secret she never asked for, yet one that defines the optics of her royal life. A monarchy obsessed with image. Let's not forget, this is the same royal family that has survived mistresses, affairs, divorces, scandals, even abdications. They've weathered financial disasters, toe-curling interviews, Netflix dramas, and constant public judgment. But incest in the bloodline of a royal bride? That was a risk they could never let see the light of day, so they buried it deep. wiped names off charts, controlled wedding optics, isolated Doria, and then crossed their fingers praying silence would hold. But here's the irony. Silence never erases. It doesn't delete the truth. It only makes it more dangerous when it finally comes out. And when this secret slipped into daylight, it hit harder precisely because it had been hidden for so long. Meghan in tears now. Imagine Meghan herself hearing the whispers. Her father, Thomas Markle, confirming details she prayed would never resurface. For Meghan, who has always portrayed herself as the victim of royal cruelty, this secret flipped the script. Suddenly, the palace wasn't just attacking her, it was allegedly protecting her too. Protecting her from a scandal too explosive to survive in the British press. The tears? Oh, they weren't just for public sympathy anymore. They were for the realization that the story of her bloodline was never hers to control. Every step she takes in California, every photo shoot, every charity speech, it's all undercut by a history written decades before she was born. A history she never had the chance to change. The cover-up that could crumble a dynasty. And this is where the gossip turns into prophecy. Because, darling, powerful families rarely collapse because of what happened long ago. They collapse because of what they tried to hide. That blank space in Meghan's genealogy wasn't just paperwork. It was fear. Fear that the truth would topple the fragile balance of public opinion. Fear that the world would turn its fascination with the royal fairy tale into disgust. And history? It has a nasty habit of punishing cover-ups harder than the original sin. What else is still hidden? So here's the million-dollar question. If this was buried so meticulously, what else lies in the shadows? Because that's how dynasties fall. Not from one scandal, but from layers of silence piled so high that when they finally crack, the whole structure caves in. Meghan walked into royal life carrying more than a veil and bouquet. She carried a bloodline that the palace allegedly worked night and day to erase. And as every historian knows, it's never the secret itself that does the lasting damage. It's the silence, the lies, the blank spaces left for others to fill with whispers. The final whisper. So we're left with haunting questions. Why did the palace think silence would hold forever? Why let Doria sit in isolation, knowing that one image would invite suspicion louder than 100 rumors? And if this decades-old secret could finally break through, what fresh bombshells might still be waiting? Because in the end, Meghan Markle isn't just the Duchess who left the palace for California sunshine. She's the woman carrying a family story so explosive it could haunt the monarchy for generations. And the cruelest twist? She didn't create the scandal, but she will always carry the fallout.